Hello everyone, Don here with the next update on the Corsair project. Sorry I wasn't able to get one in last weekend. I ran into a couple of problems that took longer than expected to deal with, and I'm still dealing with. Remember the last video I had, had the plane out, had the wings on it, and did the last weight and balance. What I ended up doing was just reweighing the plane, but I was trying to get all the controls hooked up, all the flaps hooked up, the ailerons hooked up to check all the adjustments. And it turns out the ailerons were quite a bit out of adjustment. The flaps I was having issues with back here in this corner. The rod for that middle flap was actually hitting again, and I don't know if it's just from the woodwork expanding, contracting with temperature, but it had a clearance problem, so I had to deal with that. But that was what I was doing last week, was re-rigging the flaps to make the outboard one hook up and the aileron hook up. And what I ended up doing was, because the ailerons was off, when you had the stick in the center position, the ailerons was off in a turning configuration. So I ended up pulling the tube, this push rod tube out that goes to the stick on both sides, and I put them together and matched them all up and tightened down the jam nuts, made them both the exact same length. These aren't a turnbuckle style setup, they just have rod ends that are right-handed threaded on each end. So in order to adjust them, you physically have to take one out, undo the jam nut, and then turn it in or turn it out and put it back in, and do the same on the inside. It's not a turnbuckle that goes in and out as you turn the push rod. So, but I pretty much got this all ready when the wing goes back on to final rig the last flap, and then this should be more neutral now, and then I can adjust that. But I did have the wing on the table, had a damaged section up there I had to touch up. You can see the little primer there. But I had some touch up to do on that, so I did that while I had it in. But I got in there and looked at the push rod adjustments and everything, and worked on all that, so when I get it together next time. But one of the other problems I found was the inboard gear door. This is the only thing that was holding, the gear door actually screws into this. And this was the only thing that was holding on the very bottom edge of the skin of the wing, is that little bit of lip right there and that little piece of foam. So what I got to do is I need to clean, that's actually another piece of plywood in there. There's two pieces, a piece of like 1/16 inch, and this is probably like a 3/16. In the original plans, this thing spans from the rear of the front spar to the front of the rear spar, but because of the gearbox mechanism I have in there to use the hydraulics, this had to be cut off. So this was always a problem before. It was always real flexible in there, and I was always trying to think of a way to tie this into the upper section, which is right here, to get this to keep flexing, because I knew it would be a problem. Well, just sitting out there running the airplane in the yard to get the prop settings and such, this ended up cracking loose. So I was underneath when I was rigging the flaps. I'd seen this was starting to come loose, so I kind of pulled on it and the whole thing popped loose, and it was glued good back here, but I had to break it loose to get it out. So what I have to do is I got to work on those. Let me show. And then the second problem I had was this radiator. When I got under here to find it, I noticed a leak. And it was coming from here, and digging and digging and digging, and I finally found out it was coming from the top end of the radiator. So I had to cut a big hole in the bottom of the wing, which was an intent to do later on if this ever became a problem. I had some foresight to see that I could cut this open and pull it out. But the problem was the top fitting was hitting up inside. There's the fuselage box. Right there is the side of the fuselage. And then up inside also is that metal work, that little tin work in there is for the cold air vent. Sorry, I wasn't playing this, but that's the inlet for the cold air. Oh, if you can see it, the hole right there. And then that snakes it back into the fuselage back here. So the hole in the fuselage is back there, underneath that corner. So, but it comes in here and shuffles into the fuselage. So you can see how much of this I had to cut open to get out. So I'll just make a cover. It'll have a slight bend in it to come around here, and then it'll be attached around here, and then I'll put in strips of either metal or wood in here underneath the foam back in at least a 1/2 inch over your strip on the inside, around here, and around here. And then I'll make an aluminum skin. I may have to end up clearancing this out a little more. But there'll be a aluminum piece of skin. I can skin that right over and around here, and then screw it into place with some nut plates or whatever. So that was the biggest problem, was this thing developed a leak. I noticed a couple drops on the floor the last couple times I pulled it out, but I didn't notice it was coming from here. I thought it might have been from the roof maybe leaking because it had been raining like hell the last couple weeks. But anyway, that strip of wood went right here, right on this. So this was a weak spot. You can see how it kind of flexes. If you can see it's flexing. So what I've been doing is cutting aluminum pieces, like an aluminum rib. Here's this one for this side. And that one I don't have in for some reason. But essentially, let me get this fit up in here. It slips in all the way to the back. Grab my light real quick. Alright, and then you can see, get this back far enough so you can see how that sets in there. Give me a second here, folks. Kind of tight under here. Running over my straps. Sorry about that. But I made it so it goes all the way in the back. Clears for the push rod for the flaps. And then the hinge for the doors will now go through this aluminum piece into the plywood piece. That's the piece of plywood that came out on the other side. And I'll put a strip of aluminum behind here with nut plates, nut certs, a little nut, some type of little nut plates. What do you call them? Can't think of them right now. But then I'll pop her with that piece of aluminum in, maybe 3 spots. That'll just hold that piece back here. So when the screws go through, it'll go in through this, into that, and then they'll sandwich everything together. Because this has to be removable. Once this is in here, I gotta still be able to get to this stuff if I ever need to work on it. So that's the idea with this little plate. Like so. So it'll get screwed across the top, screwed across the bottom, and then the screws for the door itself attached to that. And this piece of wood here is all the way up through the wood, touches the top skin, so you've got almost an inch of styrofoam under here. So, but that'll tighten up. Then I may put a small strip of material from here to here just to tie this front end together. So these are already made, they're ready to go in. And then I had to quit to work on that. Alright, give me a second. That's up. Dragging around on everything. But that was the biggest pain in the butt. This is the bottom hose. It was fine, but it was leaking, running all the way down and dripping, running out through here and running down and dripping. So, hated to do it, but it was something I had to kind of design into it, but I didn't go to the trouble of making the doors to make them inspectable or removable. I figured if they ever leaked, I'd do that, but I didn't expect to do it this quickly. So that was a major setback, and those other pieces are setbacks. So that's going to set me back. That's the top hose there, and that was the hardest thing to get out because that fitting that came off the top of the radiator was a 90 this way, and then when the hose came in, as I pulled it down through there, it got real close to the corner of the box, and the hose literally had to kink 90 degrees to be able to pull it out of there. I mean, it took me like 2 days just to get this thing out of here without destroying everything. And then, of course, the top hose comes out here. And there's a fitting on it, that screws onto. This here. These are some fittings I made myself that are threaded. So that'll pull through, and so I had to remove my little header tank, unhook it from this hose, and there, of course. And then, of course, it was also anchored, clamped with these little Adel clamps there. That was one of the things to clamp it in. So that's what I've been up to. And here is the actual radiator. This is the bottom hose. So that went in the airplane like this. It lays in at an angle. So that's the low side, and this is the high side. What it was doing was it was leaking out around here, running down and dripping off this corner because it's in there like this. So it rained downhill and dripped down there, but the leak was clear up here. This is the fitting that was on there, and it was like this, a little higher. But it had, somewhere around the weld, it had the tiniest of a pinhole or a slight hairline crack. You couldn't even see it. I had to plug the hose, put a hose on there and plug that in, put a hose on here, plugged it, made it so I could put air pressure in there, and I sprayed water around it. And it just fizzed up on here with such tiny little bubbles. It was such a small hole that only after the engine warmed up enough that it was able, it probably expanded. So I've got it prepped to put a new one in, and what the problem was getting this out was see how much that sticks out. The hose came out here, and even though this was like this, the hose had to kink 90 degrees in order for this thing to pull out of the wing. And then after fixing this all up, looking at it, I mean, it's got some dings in it. This here is a joint that could potentially fail. The fins on it look crappy from dragging this thing around all the years. There's one of the original thing, I had both of these on the same end, and then I found out it worked better down there. But this whole thing is pretty boogered up looking. It came out of a used car. These are out of a Pontiac Sunfire, but they're just kind of crappy looking. So I went on eBay and looked them up, and I can get brand new ones for 43 bucks. So I'm gonna buy a new one, just make up a new fitting, weld that one in. They come with two hoses. Like here, there's two metal tubes that come up, and then nuts and everything on this end. Like I said, I originally had one on here, but I'll cut the tube off, weld that one shut, cut this one off, and you have to drill it out. And inside these things, there's partitions down in there. You can see that first shelf right there. That's partition that's sealed off because the fluid comes in, passes through, and goes back out. So it's a 3-pass core. But for the radiator, I just went in and punched those out. So it's full pass. So the water comes in, shoots all the way across, and goes out. So I'm just going to order a new one, and I'll make some new fittings. And I had some foresight that I had some scrap tubes when I made these, because this is a special tool to make these rolled beads. They call it a dog knot tool in the aviation world. So I took some of this scrap tubing I had, and I made the nipples on both ends. So now I can just cut these off and remake new ones and weld it back together. So, but this one down here, it's probably going to go in, you know, possibly at an angle like so. Because it's got to kind of come out something like that. Straight up might work, but I would have to use like a 90-degree piece of hose, which I used in the airplane already, but I'm probably going to possibly put it in like this and just make it long enough that I can get the hose on it. And just cut one of these down, put it in there at a slight angle both ways. What I'll do is I'll cut a piece of this off, stuff it in there, and stuff it in the plane and see what I can get away with before I weld up the final one. So that's kind of where I'm at. As far as the weight and balance was concerned, I weighed it even though I know I had some fuel left in the tank. So I got all the weights for it, and then I went and bought a little pump from Lowe's, a little siphon pump, and I siphoned the gas out of the tank. And it turns out there was barely, not even a half a gallon left in that tank, and that airplane would still start and run off of just that half a gallon of fuel. I mean, it was very, very low. So, and then I weighed it, and it was only 2.4 pounds. It was light. So a gallon, I always figured 6 pounds, but I'm going to have to reweigh the fuel itself and see what a gallon actually weighs. It may not weigh 6 pounds, so I may not be using 90 pounds of fuel. It may be less than that. But that was just barely under 2 quarts of fuel, and it weighed, like I said, 2.4 pounds. So, all right, but anyway, I took that out and weighed it, so that had no bearing on it. And then after crunching all the numbers, after this battery's been moved up here now, with me in the airplane, no fuel, landing gear fully retracted. That is the worst case scenario for aft weight CG. And I'm still in front of the maximum aft weight CG with me in there at 225. No fuel because the fuel's in front of the CG. And gear swung back, which moves the CG back almost 1.2 inches. So when the gear's down, tank's empty, I'm well in the CG limit. When the tank is completely full, gear down, me in it, it's still behind the forward CG limit. So it's perfect. I don't have to do a thing to it. It came out perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut this short. Not much to report. I'm up to my neck in this thing now with getting these 2 little repairs done. So it's hard to say when or if I can get this thing out to the airport this year. Those gear doors are going to take a little bit to fiddle with, and getting this radiator back in there. Hopefully I have that radiator ready to go in next weekend. Get it ordered up tonight and have it this week. So sorry for the delays, but it is what it is. That's what I mean by, we're going to be doing a lot of ground handling out at the airport, ground testing, and then we're looking for this stuff. Again, engine stuff, gear stuff. We're looking for this stuff. So that's what's going to take. So it's not going to be take it to the airport and go flying. That's not going to happen. All right, folks, I'm going to cut it short this week, get this thing out so you guys something to see. And as always, feel free to leave any comments, questions, concerns. My view counts definitely dropped a lot, but that was expected. I'm not in this for the money, so it's just a thing to show people that might be interested in building one of these war models what they're going to be in for. Again, the Corsair is the most complex one out of them all. The rest of them are a lot easier to build than this. And if you use an 0200, there's still a lot of work to do when you put an 0200 on these. There's a lot of baffling and such. But you don't have to deal with the landing gear like this has, and then the coolant system like I had to go through. All right, folks, until next weekend, I'll get this thing up tonight, and you guys have something to see. And appreciate everyone taking their time to watch the videos. As always, like, share, subscribe, whatever they tell you to do. Don't care to me if you do or don't. All right, so I'm going to cut her short now. I'll get you guys next weekend. So for now, this is Diner Done Out.